Hello everyone and welcome back to my second to last video of 2019, which is my worst movies of the year list, which is really a more worst slash disappointing movies of the year list because I haven't seen everything in the year, obviously. And when I decide to choose what movie I'm going to watch, I usually don't seek out the bad movies. If I think it's going to be bad or if I hear it's going to be bad, I usually don't see them. So these are the movies honestly, the majority of the list are not necessarily bad movies, but they're just movies I was really disappointed in, movies that I just really didn't like they're technically well made. I'll mention the ones that are well made when I get to those ones. But some of them were just flat out bad, and some of them I was shocked that they were really bad. So let's get into this list. And I know before I get into anything, I know that we're technically not allowed to do worst of the year lists. But if we can do best movies of the year's list, and why can't we do the worst movies? I just don't understand that. Variety had all this hate come to them. So in this video, not only am I going to say everything that I hated about these movies, because I really did hate a lot of these movies, but you know what? I'm going to mention some good things about all these movies because a lot of people worked hard on making these movies, and I understand those points of filmmakers saying, it's because I kind of agree with this. You're putting out these lists and you're putting out these things, basically trashing all these people's hard works, like several years worth of hard work from all these crew members, all these visual effects artists, all these directors and actors, and just crew members, all these people who work together to build one entire film, a 2-hour experience for people to enjoy in the theaters that just didn't work, because I want to appreciate those people. But some of these movies just flat out suck. So let's get started with my 10 worst slash disappointing movies of the year list, starting with Dora and the Lost City of Gold was not for me. I will say this movie of all the movies on my list is number 10. I really did not like this movie. I had a hard time finding anything I really enjoyed about this movie besides Isabella Moner, who plays the title character, and I think she's really good in this movie, playing the character that she was told to play, but I'm just not the audience for this movie, and that's why it's on my list here. It's not a bad movie. I actually think this movie does a really great job of having a fun, innocent, entertaining joyride for kids that is the best possible live-action Dora movie you can possibly do. I think in that way, this is a very, very well-made movie. I'm just not the audience for it, and it's just, I fell asleep at the last 5 minutes of this movie because the ending, spoilers also for all these movies. I don't really care about spoiling these things, so slight spoiler warning. But at the end of Dora and the Lost City of Gold, it just turned into National Treasure 2, where they find a treasure room, and it's a fake treasure room, and they do one more thing, and it opens up the real treasure room. But in this movie, they do a third treasure room and a fourth treasure room, and it just keeps on going. It gets so exhausting and tiresome. And it's a more kiddie version of National Treasure 2, and that movie, in the first place, is a very kiddie movie. And it was not entertaining to me. It was kind of boring. Isabel Moner is the only saving grace of this thing. And also the fact that they had a Swiper the Fox. He looked like a stop motion animated creature in this thing that was actually really funny. And Boots had one scene where he was talking and he was Danny Trejo, and it was really funny. But besides that, this movie was really just not made for me. I respect the movie. I actually do think it's very well made. The best possible live-action Dora you could make. I'm just not the audience for it, and I sat through it, and I hated my experience watching this movie. Number 9 is a movie directed by Dan Gilroy, who directed one of my favorite movies about kind of the villain of the story, which is Nightcrawler. I love Nightcrawler, and Jake Gyllenhaal in that movie is probably his best performance. He's my favorite actor of all time. I love him in Prisoners and Enemy, and Nightcrawler, of course. I think that's probably his best performance. And this is his follow-up. The Dan Gilroy directed Velvet Buzzsaw, which is a Netflix movie that is kind of like a horror satire comedy, which I did not know is a horror satire comedy going into it. And I think if I knew that it was a satire comedy, I probably would have liked this movie. But as is, how I watched it, it was a huge letdown considering how much of a fan I am of Nightcrawler. And Jake Gyllenhaal is... He's good in this movie. And in my acting class, somebody actually did a sort of impression when he had to do one of his improv scenes. He was doing like an art piece in a art gallery. And he was going and admiring these different pieces of art. And Jake Gyllenhaal is very weird and kooky in this movie. I actually really like his performance. That's the only good part. I don't remember anything from this movie. It was very forgettable for me. It wasn't entertaining. It was really, really weird. I usually like weird movies, and I just couldn't get behind it because I guess it was being very self-inferential. And I'm telling you, if I probably watched this movie, I might enjoy it. But as of right now, it rubbed me the wrong way. It seemed very, very just, I don't know, self-indulgent. It wasn't a movie that I enjoyed watching in any way besides watching Jake Gyllenhaal do some weird stuff. And it was a huge disappointment to me. Number 8 is The Addams Family, which I actually was looking forward to. You see the Addams Family characters, and you see how their kind of visual look and their image kind of warrants an animated feature, because they've had a bunch of live action in the past that I have not seen. But I went to this with an open mind, and I was really just bored and just kind of turned off by this movie in every way because I mean the characters were fun enough, and when the movie decided to be really weird and be like Addams Family, and when Wednesday was going off and everything with Wednesday going off to school and being kind of like the fish out of water storyline, I really liked that. But the movie was too afraid to be weird and to really be Addams Family and to embrace how strange this entire world is, because they pull in this town where they're trying to like conform everybody's like Conformityville or whatever the heck the town was called, and the villain of the movie was extremely obnoxious and annoying. She just drove me insane the entire runtime. And when this movie decided to be like the Addams Family, it was great, and there were so many different subplots that just wasn't a part of that just drove me insane. This movie honestly should be higher up on my list of worst movies, but I don't know, I feel like talking about it now, I can't really think of anything good about it besides Wednesday's story arc, and besides some weird moments where I forgot Pugsley, he's like climbing on the walls and he looks at the camera and there's like lightning that strikes. Or when the hand is looking up pictures of feet on the computer and he closes it really fast when somebody walks into the room. It was weird stuff like that I really enjoyed, but for the most part, it was just bogging us down with this boring storyline with this other family and this other Conformityville that is a good idea, but it spent way too much time spending it on that with all these different subplots that actually had nothing to do with the main plot at all, and just was very, very, very just irritating and boring. Number 7 is probably a better movie than Addams Family, but it was something that I was very, very excited for, and it was just a complete letdown. And also, it led to me crashing my car and totaling my car, and it was not worth it. This is Godzilla, King of the Monsters. Maybe that is kind of a cherry on top of my hatred for this movie, because I was driving to a screening for it, and somebody ran a stop sign and totaled my car, and it was a very unfortunate situation. Then I finally got to see the movie, and it was just kind of meh. It just the human storylines in this movie, which I'm sure you've heard a million times, just is very uninteresting. Vera Farmiga in this movie was very, like, she's a great actress. I'm not taking anything away from her performance in this movie. I thought she did a good job with what she was given, but she was given complete garbage. She was a very flip-floppy character that had no motivations, just kind of evil for the sake of being evil for no reason. Her family dynamic you just really didn't care about. And same thing with Eleven from Stranger Things. She's really solid in this movie, and she's probably the best human character in this movie. But it's just, they spent so much time on it, and even more so than the Godzilla that came out in 2014. I thought those human characters they probably spent more time on those characters in that movie because Godzilla's barely in that one, but at least you sort of cared, and at least the spectacle seemed grand and epic. And in this movie, the visuals are incredible. The VFX artists who spent their time on this movie made a beautiful work of art. You can take any screenshot of the monsters in this movie and turn it into a screensaver. It is just that beautiful. It's just the movie itself is really boring, and just like the action scenes with the monsters are so few and far between. And Godzilla, there's a huge chunk of this movie where Godzilla dies and he's just not in it and nothing's really happening. And it's just, man, this was a huge disappointment to me. I was really looking forward to it, especially with those epic trailers, with the music and the visuals and all of that. It should have just stayed a trailer. This movie was very disappointing, and it kind of hurts my expectations for Kong vs. Godzilla, because you know they're going to have all these characters come back for it, and it's just, I'm not looking forward to that. Number 6 is The Lion King. Disney is not infallible. They have some problems, and their Disney live-action remakes are kind of a mess. You know, Aladdin, spoiler alert, Aladdin is not on this list, and it's not on my best movies list. That movie was just fine for me. I actually really enjoyed it for the most part, until I watched the animated one and saw how much greater that movie was. But Aladdin at least did some things different. You know, I had Will Smith not trying to replicate what Robin Williams did, but he did some different stuff with it. Lion King was the exact, basically shot-for-shot remake, and when we hated Psycho when they did the shot-for-shot remake, why would people love Lion King when they do a shot-for-shot remake when you don't have those performances and those personalities and that liveliness that the animated movie has? Because this might seem a little backwards for me to say about this movie, but the animation and the visual effects and how realistic those lions look is an incredible feat. It is some of the best VFX ever done on film. But it's just, it ruins the movie because there's no emotion in the lions, and they're just so stale. And I will take absolutely nothing away from all the voice acting in this movie, because I actually think it is very, very good. I think the cast does a great job. I think Chiwetel Ejiofor got the short end of the stick, and people slammed him and just crushed his performance in this movie that I actually thought was fine. But the problem is that these voice performances that these actors are giving, they're giving 110% effort into making this. But when you're trying to compare it to the actual movements and the mouth movements of the lions in this movie, it just doesn't fit. It seems like the entire movie is audio dubbed over instead of these voices naturally coming from the animals themselves. And like I said, the VFX artists, they spent so much time on this, and you can tell every frame of this movie is incredible looking. It's very photorealistic, and that's just, Jon Favreau shot himself in the foot there. Jungle Book has a nice mixture of that animated, like, lively look, and he took more creative freedom into making them look more animated. And this one, they just don't look animated. They're so real, it kind of ruins the movie, and that's my disappointment in this one, because the animated is so good, and how do you ruin this story? It just, you sucked all the soul out of The Lion King, and I just don't know how you did that. Here we go, top 5 worst movies. We have hit the truly bad movies. So everything before this I don't think are necessarily bad movies. Lion King is a very technically well-made movie. Same thing with Godzilla. But Dark Phoenix was just a disaster from start to finish. And, I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing ever put to film. But I realized 20 minutes in that I just didn't care about these characters. Even though I love First Class and I love Days of Future Past, for some reason, this crew of new young X-Men are just... you don't care about them. I mean, this is the last one. You know that Disney just bought Fox, and that's probably the problem. And you just don't care. And the entire movie, I was just kind of staring at an empty, hollow thing. And when they killed Mystique, you just didn't care. When things happened, you didn't care. When anything was happening with Jean and her inner conflict, you just didn't care. And these villain characters were so utterly bad. And you can tell that they reshot the last third of this movie, and they took out the scrolls. They inserted these. Jessica Chastain just had nothing to do because they took everything that she had to do out of the movie. And it was just... man, this movie is not good. I think the only saving grace is James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender, who has been fantastic in all these X-Men movies that they're in. And, I think they do the best job that they can. And Michael Fassbender is once again the best part of an X-Men movie. But it was extremely hollow, and I do think this movie is better than I was expecting it to be, considering I thought this was going to be a complete train wreck after they pushed it, after Disney bought Fox, and you heard some of the behind-the-scenes stories of this movie being a complete disaster, and I do think in some ways it was. But I don't know, it just felt hollow to me because of everything that happened behind the scenes, and that's really unfortunate. Now, number 4, I have mixed feelings on because it did spawn one of my favorite videos I made this year. I tore myself in half for this video. But yeah, Polaroid is complete trash. I tore this movie a new one. This movie was delayed about 2 years, or I think a year or so. I don't know how long this movie is delayed. It's been so long. I kind of forgot half the movie. But it's just this really crappy horror movie that was just bogged down into a PG-13 crap fest that was made in the Weinstein era, and that's why it was so delayed. And the main character's name was Bird, which is just really laughable to begin with. And just the movie had no guts to do anything. Nothing really happened with his characters, and it's really great premise, and it's based on this short film with the same director that is excellent. Go watch the Polaroid short film. Do not spend money on this movie like I did. I rented it for I think I rented it for somewhere around $5 to $10. I spent a good amount of money on this movie to watch it, to do that video, and I do think it ended up being worth it. But it is not worth you watching. Go watch my video. Go watch my review. Watch me tear that thing apart like I tore myself apart, because I hated Polaroid. I didn't really like too much about it, besides that excellent premise and besides that excellent short film. And I do think that the main actress in this movie is solid, but she just was given a bad movie to act in. Alright, Men in Black International is the first truly atrocious movie I saw this year. I have not been this disappointed by a movie in a long time, besides my number 1 on this list. I love the Men in Black movies. Besides the second one, I think is just... It's not good. It's kind of a meh movie. I enjoy moments of it, and I think Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones are good in the movie. But Men in Black 1 is great, and I actually really like Men in Black 3. And this one, with Chris Hemsworth and Tessa Thompson, and the director of Fast 8, which, say what you will about that movie, it's ridiculous, and I don't really like it that much. I thought it was fairly well directed. I was excited for this movie, and for it to be a complete train wreck that was also hollow and soulless, and the fact that the most creative alien they can choose for a Men in Black movie is Rebecca Ferguson with an arm sticking out of her back is very lazy writing. It felt like one of those things where they needed to keep the rights for the Men in Black property, so they had to push out a film. Even though Sony owns Men in Black, they don't need to push out a Men in Black film. It just seemed like a cash grab. They took some stars that are very popular now. They said, oh, Thor Ragnarok worked with these two leads. Let's throw them in a movie together, see if they have chemistry here. And they don't, because they don't have Taika Waititi directing it with a fun, interesting story with a good script, and it's just extremely unfunny. Hemsworth is very unlikable in this movie, which, how do you make Chris Hemsworth unlikable? The only saving grace is Tessa Thompson, who I think is excellent in this movie, and I really do like the idea of having somebody discover the Men in Black, because they're supposed to be this secret society, and for her to be smart enough to be able to infiltrate their system and be able to find the place is awesome. Alright, I have the Cats poster up. Not because it's my number one, but because it's my number two, because it is a piece of crap. I did not like this movie at all, but I will say before I get into anything else about this, that this movie has a very, very passionate fan base. I got in a kind of, I don't want to say a comment argument in my Cats review, but I got in a little just like film debate about Cats, which is very bizarre. And I think this movie has its audience of people who like the Broadway show, people who like the music, and people who like Taylor Swift, because that's all the people searching for my video was people looking for Taylor Swift and McCavity. And I hated this movie. I really did. I thought it was very boring, which I was not expecting. I thought this movie would be a fun, bad movie. And if it was a fun, bad movie and I really, truly enjoyed the experience of watching it, this movie could have made my best movies of the year list. Probably not, but it might have been an honorable mention for a best, worst movie. But besides it just being extremely boring, it just visually it is a nightmare. Not because of visual effects. I think the visual effects artists killed themselves making this movie. They did a great job, or the best they could have done. But they're making cats into people, and you're already getting to this very uncanny valley area that is just unsettling and just creepy. And the fact that they're all like moving around very sexually, and I work in a movie theater. Parents are coming out with these kids wanting refunds 10 minutes into this movie because it's vastly inappropriate, because, you know, the movie is rated PG and it shouldn't be PG. It is a very disturbing and unsettling movie that was not fun in any way, besides the Rebel Wilson eating cockroach people. That was the only saving grace, and I actually did like the Taylor Swift scene, to be fair. I thought the catnip thing was kind of cool, with them all freaking out because it was weird, but I wish this movie was weirder, and how am I saying that about Cats? I wish Cats was more weird and wild than it was, which is what everybody was expecting, but this movie is just plain boring, and I hated watching it. But let's get to the movie that was supposed to start my Halloween series. I was going to kick off my 13 Days of Halloween series with this movie because I was very much looking forward to it. It is a long-awaited sequel to a movie that I absolutely love. I wish I had the poster for the original one, and they kind of recreated the poster for this one. The hype was insane for this movie. Jesse Eisenberg, Woody Harrelson, Emma Stone, one of my favorite actors out there, and Abigail Breslin from Little Miss Sunshine, and the original Zombieland. We have Zombieland Double Tap, which was the biggest piece of garbage that I have experienced this year, not only because it was extremely disappointing considering how much I love the original, but because it was just flat out bad and it was very poorly made. It was very much trying to pull the same jokes from the first movie but just make it worse. There was nothing good about this movie. I think the leads did the best they could, but Woody Harrelson was a joke in this movie. He was running around like an idiot. He was not Tallahassee. I don't know who he was playing, but it was not Tallahassee. Jesse Eisenberg was just, I don't know, the relationship that they set up with Emma Stone and Eisenberg in the first movie was so good, and then they had them bickering and arguing with each other. This entire movie was just very irritating, and Abigail Breslin had nothing to do, and it's just, what was this movie? It was a complete disaster in my book. I got maybe 30 minutes in, and the people sitting, my friends sitting next to me, they were just like, oh, this is so boring. And that's when I realized I was watching a complete train wreck, because I was Phantom Menacing myself. I was trying to convince myself that what I was watching was good, when really I was watching a complete nightmare that is a lot scarier than any horror movie I've seen this year, because it was just plain bad. I hated this movie. The only saving grace, I will say, besides the great cast, is probably the after credit scene. That's right, the after credit scene is the only good part of this movie, with Bill Murray, and does a flashback to the beginning of the zombie apocalypse, and it's very, very funny. Look it up online. It's probably on YouTube somewhere. Do not watch Zombieland Double Tap. I do not recommend it at all. I do not know how this movie got positive reviews when I thought it was just a complete piece of garbage. That is my top 10 worst/disappointing movies of the year list. I had fun making this video, so hopefully you guys enjoyed watching it. I am going to keep on making these videos, so stay tuned. I will have my top 10 movies of the year list coming out tomorrow, or same day probably, on New Year's Eve. I will have that video up as well with my brother. He's going to do his top 10 list, and I had to push it out to top 15. So best movies of 2019. It has been a great year for movies. Let's get on to that. So thanks guys for watching, and I hope to see you all there.